Alaikum and welcome. Thank you for attending this conference and symposium. And thanks to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. We are all in dire need of such meetings, in fact, to talk about the latest developments and what's happening in the Gaza Strip and in Palestine. Resistance unites us, catastrophes and tragedies unite us, and common concerns bring us together. We are here today to discuss the issue that is preoccupying us, and we hope to see an end soon for the catastrophe that our people in occupied territories are going through. We will focus on three main themes, and thanks to our speakers, of course, we'll cover the political, humanitarian, and the economic aspects of this crisis. We'll give each panelist 15 minutes and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the three interventions, and you can write down your notes or questions, and we look forward to your interaction and contribution to discuss the current situation. We'll start with Dr. Tamer Qarmout. He will be talking about the war on Gaza, the reasons, the timing, and the consequences. And he is a professor at the Doha Institute. Dr. Tamer, please, you have 15 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this conference. The timing is painful. I really hope that we do not talk about Gaza in a crisis, painful crisis. I will not be speaking as an academic, but because I am from Gaza, I am Palestinian, and I used to be a UN employee in Gaza for a long time, in addition to my academic capacity. It's difficult to isolate the different aspects. There is a political component, there is a economic component, and we will talk about the future. I'll be dividing this talk into four parts. First, the timing. Second, the humanitarian consequences and other consequences. And thirdly, the expected outcome of this war in accordance to what Israel announced as its war aims. And fourthly, we'll try and discuss what is the next. The war is taking place in a very complex regional circumstances. First, let me say something about the timing and the conditions. There are many, in my opinion, that is, there were many factors. First of all, in view of an extremist Israeli right-wing government and all the practices in the West Bank, Gaza, Palestine, closed all avenues for any future breakthroughs. Secondly, Hamas and their position as a resistance movement and as the ruling entity in Gaza, this requires an expanded analysis. Hamas, after free and fair elections under the international community, Hamas won the elections and started ruling after an inner fighting with Fatah. So in the end, Hamas did not receive Gaza as a liberated land. Everybody knows Gaza is still under siege, and Israel controls every aspect of life, controls anything that goes in, anything that goes out. Gaza is a huge open prison with 2.3 million people inside. Even though Israel is not present inside Gaza, Israel still controls everything. From the moment Hamas came to rule Gaza, Gaza witnessed many wars in 2008, 2009, 2014, 2021. Now, the economic situation is really painful now that more than 50% of Gazan population live under the poverty line. And a large percentage of the youth are unemployed. So therefore, there is no hope for life. Therefore, Hamas is between a rock and a hard place of ruling the Gaza Strip and resisting an occupation. Hamas does not recognize the Oslo agreements, and it found itself having to deal with this. So Hamas is between two fires. If you've been following events, there were many attacks on the Islamic Jihad, and Hamas did not take part, so much so that it was accused of letting down resistance and other factions, and only concerned itself with ruling itself. Of course, this current war disproves all of these allegations. Hamas, as a Palestinian resistance movement and also responsible for ruling over 2.3 people under siege, and Hamas does not have all the capabilities and to provide services. So Hamas was faced with a big question. The status quo is very dysfunctional. So should Hamas continue normalizing the status quo and allow for the situation to carry on? This is another question that we really contemplate. This is the second factor. The third factor is the wave of normalization in the region and the consequences. Hamas feared that it will be isolated and the region will see new arrangements which will serve Israeli interests and leave Hamas behind. So Hamas had to ask itself, should I allow myself to be left behind, or should I do something about the situation in Gaza? The fourth factor is the major powers now are more concerned with the crisis in the Ukraine, the crisis in Taiwan, the COVID pandemic. The world changes. There are new powers emerging. There is a lot of tension. Unfortunately, the Middle East, including Palestine, is part and parcel of this scene, regional and international. All of this made the Palestinian issue a marginal issue. The international community's role has only been confining themselves to donating some money or providing some charity. Even the UNRWA itself was marginalized to end this issue of the return of refugees or taking care of the refugees. The fifth factor is the weakness of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, and all aspects of Palestinian reconciliation had ended up in failure because there is a veto, an international veto on any reconciliation. Hamas is not recognized and will never be recognized. So this put an end to any reconciliation efforts. Of course, we Palestinians are also responsible. Oslo has ended up in a complete blocked avenue, and all of these factors can provide a background for war. What about the timing? The timing I'm still unable to answer, and I think there are more than one scenario to answer it. But before we can answer that, we must pose 4 questions, of each question leading to a different scenario. These scenarios pertain to Hamas and everybody. Is this war really related to Hamas only and Hamas's strategy to face up to the occupation? And the timing, the symbolism of the timing it's coinciding with the 50th anniversary of liberating Sinai, and also maybe this is a message to be sent to the Palestinians and the Arab world that the resistance is still here and there is another path forward. Question number 2, was this war planned and preconceived by Hamas and other regional powers and international powers to change the status quo and the rules of the game in this region? Question number 3, is this war the beginning of Hamas to climb down the tree of roots sticking to ruling Gaza, which caused it a lot of criticisms, and go back to being a resistance movement? Is this an honorable way out, a face-saving formula for Hamas to leave all the responsibilities of ruling Gaza under the umbrella of Oslo and without any international recognitions? Number 4, and this is a worrying question for me, maybe Hamas was lured into this conflict and ultimately will be left alone to face the consequences. So therefore it's important to contemplate these questions and ponder the outcome. As for the future of Gaza and this conflict, regarding the question of expulsion, this is undoable. Historically, in 2008, when the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip crossed the Egyptian borders in their thousands, but ultimately they came back because there was siege. People had to do something. In the Palestinian psyche, expulsion is a red line. 70% of the Gazan population are refugees themselves. Nobody wants another Nakba. Nobody wants to repeat this experience unless it's done forcefully. Factor number 2 is the steadfastness of the Egyptian position. Sisi, in his meeting with Blinken, his statements were indicative clearly enough. Despite some economic gains, maybe Egypt is going through a difficult patch economically, like Mubarak when he got involved in the war against Iraq to forgive Egypt's debts. I think Sisi cannot afford that because the doctrine of the Egyptian army itself will never accept Sinai being turned into a Palestinian homeland. The other factor is, can we really imagine that what they are trying to do, the settlement of Palestinians in Sinai, will mean refugee camps and tents? Egypt, the Egyptian people are very generous. There are refugees from Iraq, Libya, Sudan. They there as residents. They renew their resident permits on annual basis. They are not considered as Egyptians and they are not considered as refugees. They are guests. This is maybe Egyptians can do that. Gazans can do that. Go to Egypt, get residence permits and settle there. This will be not a vulgar way like having tents erected in Sinai, but allowing the Gazan population to live amongst the Egyptians. Now, with all this shuttle diplomacy by Blinken to Arab countries, it seems that Blinken has failed to get a green line to give Israel a free hand to do what it likes in Gaza. It seems that there is some Arab opposition. The other important thing for the future scenarios, Israel's declared aims by this coalition government to end the Hamas existence or Hamas rule. Historically, Israel has announced that many times and had failed. Maybe they think it's different this time round. Therefore, I expect three scenarios from the perspective of a Palestinian. The first scenario is to end Hamas's rule. This is a weak objective, but it's doable if there was a very destructive, long-term, wide-ranging military operations. This may need Israel to stay in Gaza for 4 months or something, but if anybody after that, a Palestinian comes out from the rubble holding an AK-47 rifle on the Palestinian flank, this will mean the end of that Israeli aim. Gaza's needs for reconstruction will be monumental. Will Hamas be ready to have the responsibility, and who will they be partnering with? Will it be the Palestinian Authority, Arab countries, UNIFIL? We don't know. Time will tell. The other scenario is to end totally Hamas's rule. This will be of huge consequences, and even the Americans, I think, do not want that. Neither do the Arab countries. The more likely scenario is to wage a limited war in the northern parts of Gaza to satisfy Israel, and then agree on a long-term truce or ceasefire with international guarantees. I favor this scenario, but these are all just scenarios. The last thing, there are variables which are important. First of all, the position of Saudi Arabia vis-à-vis normalization and continuing normalization or putting an end to it now. American elections are important. Everybody, both Republicans and Democrats, are competing with each other to gain the favor of Israel. And also, what is happening in Gaza will require paying a cost, whether at the level of reconstruction or at the humanitarian. Who will bear that? The Arabs or the Western countries with all the problems they're facing? Finally, please forgive me, Dr. Ibrahim, the consequences on the Palestinian National Project. I think if the PA continued this path, there will be a huge rift, and even if all this or one of these scenarios materialize, we will face a dead end with the PA. It pains me to say this, but it's obvious that in the conferences by the spokesperson by Hamas, that they feel disappointed with the reactions in the West Bank and the Arab world. Maybe Hamas wanted a different reaction, but somehow it didn't happen. Finally, the future of Netanyahu and his government, maybe Netanyahu can drag Americans and the Iranians into a war that neither side wants. Maybe he will find this a golden opportunity to implicate the Americans in the war. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
salute Gazans for their resoluteness, for them to stay steadfast, irrespective of the shelling, this crazy shelling that is taking place and has been taking place in the last 10 days. I would like to. So when it comes to international humanitarian law, so the first session that we had, so I would like to salute the professor who teaches law. So all of this is only ink on paper, so we do not see any of such applications on the ground, unfortunately. But this is international humanitarian law. So when you talk about international humanitarian law, it is said that war or wars in general cannot be stopped, but we have to have certain applications that would be restricted by the law. We should guarantee the protection of civilians. We have to protect property. And there is an agreement that has been concluded. So we have many countries that have ratified the international humanitarian law. And also there is the First Geneva Convention, in order to alleviate the situation of the wounded and sick people in the armed forces. And also this applies to maritime spheres as well. And also there is another convention that talks about prisoners of war. And also we have the fourth convention about the protection of civilians during war. And we have also the additional protocols in the 70s of the 20th century, the first additional protocol, which is about the 12th of August protocol, which is the protection of the wounded and people that have been impacted, and also victims of international and non-international humanitarian non-international conflicts. So that is why protection of civilians should be guaranteed, and also protection of property as well. So before I started, or before I came here, one of my friends who works in IHL, he works in the ICRC in particular, he told me, I do not expect you to talk about war on Gaza because this is the account by the occupier. No, we say Gaza under occupation. We should not call it a war, we should call it occupation. So Gaza is still under occupation, and this is an occupied territory or territories. And when we consult the ICRC's website, and when we look at the legal status of Gaza, so the ICRC considers Gaza as an occupied territory, and that Israel is practicing some authority on the Gaza Strip, including the land, the airspace, and sea borders as well. And although Israel has been controlling Gaza since for all these years, so Israel is still to be committed in keeping with the occupation law, because this is in proportionality with the level of control that it practices. That is why IHL entails that Israel should meet the basic needs of the people in Gaza, and in particular, it should guarantee that food, medical requirements, and medical services, goods should be guaranteed for the people in Gaza. And since this is an occupying power, IHL gives it right to take some procedures, such as observing those persons to guarantee security, but also proportionality as a principle should be respected. The nature of restrictions should be justified in keeping with the security requirements, and also the response should be in proportionality with what is required by the occupying forces. If we consult the international humanitarian law, and if we look at the Rome Statute of the ICC, we see that there are a number of items and articles that are not respected, that are violated, particularly if we look at the coverage that we have seen on television in recent days. So international humanitarian law gives a minimum level of protection to persons who do not take place in the animosities taking place with the belligerent parties. And also, international humanitarian law bans any attacks that can lead to casualties or impact civilians or their property. That is why old people, pregnant women, wounded people should enjoy a particular level of protection. Any person that is under this banner should be protected. That is why. So also the medical services and facilities also should be respected, and weapons, chemical weapons, should not be used. It is banned to destroy or to remove any items that are necessary for people to stay alive. It is also banned to ask people to migrate from their territories, and the parties to of an armed conflict should not order people, civilians, to leave their place. And when it comes to the Rome statutes, we have 3 or 4 components. We're talking here about genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. These are all war crimes. And when it comes to that, all what had been mentioned has been manifested and seen on television. And here I would like to summarize. So when you subjugate a group of people, when you carry out premeditated killing, inhumane treatment to cause harm to the health of people, to the bodies of people, to carry out unlawful imprisonment, and also to carry out acts in an indiscriminate way against civilians who do not directly take part in the military actions, and also to avoid targeted non-military targets against individuals, against units, against compounds that contribute for delivering humanitarian aid, such as the stocks of the United Nations agencies and representations, and all agencies that carry out humanitarian work. So when we carry out an act of aggression, it should not be premeditated against civilians, so charitable organizations, and also hospitals and gatherings where we have sick people, wounded. This also should be avoided. Targeting means of transportation, people who use such means of transportation, people or agencies that have clear insignias, and also to ban the use of any intoxicating liquids or gases, and also to use indiscriminate weapons or indiscriminately use weapons or weapons that can lead to excessive wounds. So we have seen in the last 10 days applications of all what had been mentioned. We have thousands of martyrs, and in excess of 10,000 people have been wounded. Thousands of buildings have been destroyed. Also, the infrastructure was completely destroyed. We have seen acts of aggression against hospitals, on civilian installations, schools. We have reports that was issued today that talks about the targeting of a museum. Families, complete families have been wiped out. Complete families. We're talking about some families that are as many as 50 people. In excess of 11,000 people have been wounded. I do not claim to be a lawyer or with a legal background, but I do see that there are so many IHL violations. So, how can we enforce international humanitarian law? Here is the difficult thing. As the lecturer said last week, he said that IHL is only ink on paper if it is not implemented. Perhaps it was implemented at some point in time through a number of war crime courts or tribunals that had been established, Rwanda tribunals, Sierra Leone tribunal, but there should be a political will for us to enforce IHL. Unfortunately, the international community is in complete solidarity with the occupying force. Leaders of big countries are not only providing help and support, subterranean support, but they are part of the operations that are taking place. They are ready to send forces to help Israel in its occupation and in its continuous aggression on Gaza. I do not know. I cannot say how we would be able to implement IHL. I do not know if it had been implemented when it comes to the Palestinian case in the past. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghassan. Just a reminder, as Dr. Tamer has also said, our colleagues, Dr. Ghassan, Dr. Tamer, they're not here in their capacities as professors here with us at the Doha Institute and Arab Center. They're also from Gaza and they have their families, friends behind. We appreciate their concern and their personal involvement in this and their concern for their families. And now we move to our third panelist, Dr. Ayat Hamdan, and she is managing editor of Astur here with us. Dr. Ayat, please, the floor is yours for 15 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, and thanks to all our esteemed guests. The title is Gaza, a Hole from Hell, Ethnic Cleansing. The title, of course, I borrowed from the UNRWA. They described the latest situation in the Gaza Strip, events that turned Gaza into a hole in hell. The paper I'm trying to present deals with the forceful expulsion and the exacerbation of the humanitarian situation inside the Gaza and the expulsion. Today, the expulsion issue is real and for serious, and there is interaction at the regional and international levels. The paper will try to gauge the attacks on Gaza and to shed light on the context in which this is happening and the Arab and international reactions. And also I'll allude to some of the scenarios which are likely to take place as a result of this forceful expulsion. But before delving into any details, it has to be said that Israel in this war is committing crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide, aided and abetted by the West. They are waging this war against peoples who are unarmed civilians. All what they are trying to do is to remain on their land, the land that was taken away from them in other parts 75 years ago. The population of Gaza is 2.3, living in an area not more than 350 square kilometers, considered to be one of the most densely populated areas in the world. They are witnessing a continuing humanitarian crisis because of the land, air, and sea siege which was laid on them by Israel more than 16 years ago, and the subsequent 5 wars 2008, 2009, 2014, 2018, 2021, and 5,365 Palestinian martyrs had fallen, and more than 65,000 were injured, and thousands were made homeless. The infrastructure was destroyed, homes, hospitals, schools, and this kind of policy, and this is according to international organizations and activists, turned Gaza into the biggest open air prison in the world. And by the year 2022, Gaza was thought to be or will be an area unfit for human population. This is what's happening. Really, Israel has surrounded Gaza in addition to all the siege applications, the fence they built, and this is supported by the latest technologies, and Israel was trying to market it to the whole world as the means of fencing off the countries. 83% of the Gazan population live under the poverty line. 80% of the Gazan population rely on humanitarian aid. As for food security, 73% of the Gazan population lack food security. This made Israel to decide that the minimum number of calories that a Palestinian citizen, according to their age or condition, they decided, according to this calculation, the number of trucks which will be allowed into Gaza carrying food. The war so far has been most violent, judging by the ferocity of the firepower used. Some analysts say that in less than 6 days of aggression against Gaza, the amount of weapons or bombs used in Afghanistan in 1 year. The current war, these are just estimates and they are increasing by the minute, is 8,802 martyrs, more than 1,000 are children, and it goes beyond the casualties of the 2014 war, which lasted about 2 months between July and August, and saw 2,270 people falling martyrs and some 7,000 were injured. Israel has destroyed more than 1,500 buildings, including houses, and 800 were completely destroyed. Also, there are many schools, including 20 run by the UNRWA, and 2 schools were used as refugee centers for the Palestinian refugees. They used to take shelter in them. Israel is also placing restrictions on the construction material, which impacted the reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip and all the vital infrastructure that needed to be repaired or reconstructed. If we compare what happened in 2008 till 2023, and these statistics are until September 2023, we will see that the highest number of martyrs were Gaza City, followed by Deir al-Balah, then Gaza North, then Khan Yunis, then Rafah. These are the areas that the Israeli orders of force expulsion were issued are in fact the most densely bombarded, and the highest number of martyrs had fallen. And this map shows the distribution of the population in Gaza. We see that Gaza City has the biggest share of the population, followed by Gaza North in the second place, followed by Khan Yunis, then Deir al-Balah, then Rafah. The borders, these are the borders that Israel has established. They call it the Gaza Valley, to force Gazans to leave their towns and places and move in the other direction. The healthcare is almost in total collapse, and this is as a result of the successive wars waged by Israel on Gaza. They never recovered from. Also, collective punishment by cutting off water and electricity supplies, which exacerbated the crisis in the health sector, especially in the intensive care unit, dialysis unit, and premature children units and the incubators they need. Of course, all of these pressures are beyond the health sector's capability to deal with in Gaza. Gaza has 35 hospitals with a total number of beds to 3,026 beds. The number of doctors is 6,053 and 10,800 nurses. Operating theaters, they have 89, which has some 250 beds. The medical supplies, drugs and the like now are reaching the bare minimum. 23 hospitals were issued with orders by the Israelis of evacuating their patient. Under normal circumstances, and if we take into account the distribution of the population and their share of bed shares, we'll find that in normal conditions, each 760 Palestinian people will need one bed. Under the current situation, 4 wounded persons will need or will have to share one bed. This is a distribution of hospitals inside Gaza. We'll see that the vast majority of these hospitals are concentrated in the north and the middle. The south has the least number, and the World Health Organization has declared that these hospitals have really lost their ability to provide care, and they're on the verge of total collapse. Also, these aggressions have also targeted medical staff. The World Health Organization documented 34 attacks from the 7th of October until now on hospitals, which led to 26 people killed from the medical crews and 13 were damaged, and the occupation forces destroyed 23 ambulances and bombarded 13 hospitals, or 20 hospitals. 2 were completely inoperational as a result of the direct bombardment. In addition to hospitals reaching full capacity, they suffer from the lack of water and electricity supplies, in addition to an increase of refugees taking shelter in hospitals, because even the UNRWA schools people used to take shelter in are being bombarded now. Also, and the wounded people, if his condition is not critical, and even if he's unable to leave hospitals and due to the lack of any safe havens for them, so most of them lost their homes anyway, and they have their families living in the UNRWA schools, and this is adding to the pressures the hospitals are reeling under. The other crisis regards to the utilities, water and electricity supplies, and this crisis in the electricity, water supplies, the sewage system is related to the chronic lack of fuels in Gaza. Gaza has two sources of electricity. The first is the Israeli electric company, which provides electricity to Gaza through 10 lines, and the local station in Orange here, which is inside Gaza. Despite that, despite the presence of this power station, they cannot provide the service they need to provide for the people because of the lack of fuel, and also because Israel directly targets their power stations. Also, Israel has banned the entering of all the fuel that these power stations need, and as we said, the power station was directly targeted, and the lines, not only in this war but in all previous war Israel waged on Gaza. If we want to now see the demand for electricity supplies, in the year 2023, we see that it reaches almost 46% of the supply which is provided. Some reports indicate that electricity is provided for 4 to 6 hours per day. Other sources say that in 2023, the maximum numbers until September 2023 was 13 hours when electricity was available for people in Gaza. As for water supplies, this is one of the secondary crises that the people in Gaza are suffering from. The source of water in Gaza is also, it comes from two sources. The first being the groundwater in Gaza itself, and it provides 95% of the fresh water in Gaza, and this is depleting fast, and because contaminated water is seeping through to it. Time is running out, so I will not go into details. The share of the per capita of water is 2.7 liter of water, but 97% of this water is populated, and according to the World Health Organization, is unfit for human consumption because it's totally contaminated. So only 3% of the water is fit for human consumption. If we look at this map, we will see that these are the areas where the water is most impacted by pollution. This And now I want to quickly talk about the context in which this expulsion is taking place. We should know that there is 3,000 Palestinians are still internally displaced in South Gaza from previous wars. The threat to Gaza comes before Israel's warning of a land invasion, and Israel notified the United Nations to evacuate northern Gaza with 1.1 million people living to be evacuated in 24 hours. And also the Israelis distributed leaflets threatening people with death as a result of military operations. Netanyahu said, I say to Gaza people, leave because we will start hitting all your areas with all the power that we've got. You have gallant Israeli defense minister in a statement that everybody heard about that I was ordered to implement a total siege on Gaza. There'll be no water, no electricity. We are dealing with animals and we will behave accordingly. Now, this is until 13th of October. These are that 64% of refugees are inside the UNRWA schools. The others are the PA schools. The others are houses belonging to relatives, and more than 1 million people, according to reports, are internally displaced now, focused in the middle of Gaza, Khan Yunis, and the Gaza Valley, and the number can reach 600,000, 400,000 in the UNRWA schools, and the rest in northern Gaza. This is a comparison with the last round of war in 2021 and the distribution of the internally displaced, mainly in North Gaza. Now that this expulsion is taking place in the absence of safe humanitarian corridors, Gaza, when it announced its war on Gaza and talked about the necessity of Palestinians leaving from the north to the south, they announced that the Salah ad-Din road and the coastal road as the path, although we saw Israel, despite that, despite declaring these two roads as safe passages, Israel bombed them and killed more than 70 people and injured hundreds of them. So as I said previously, that people now in Gaza go to the UNRWA schools, PA schools, to stay with the relatives, and even these were not saved the Israeli bombardment. And this, what makes matters worse is these areas are already overpopulated, and the pressure on the hospitals and infrastructure inside Gaza. We see in this map the distribution of poverty lines. We find that South Gaza is the poorest area in Gaza, and also unemployment is the highest. Now I quickly discuss the international. 1 minute, please. Egypt has declared that it will not accept refugees. This will mean the ending of the Palestinian cause, and the Palestinians would not. So the the Jordanian position is similar. As for the scenarios, the most likely is the Palestinians standing steadfastly facing up to the Israeli invasion. And secondly, the Nakba is still present in the psyche of the Palestinian people. 80% of Gazans are refugees anyways. Also, the third and fourth generations of Palestinians who have not lived through the Nakba, but they lived with its consequences, they are insisting on going back. And in 2018 and 2019, the marches for return are testimony to that. There is also a psychological factor, and what refugees have had to endure over the years because they were uprooted from where they were and forcefully expelled to others. This is still present in the hearts and minds of Palestinians. Also, there is a political component, and that is not to allow for the Palestinian cause to be liquidated outside the scope of Palestinian willpower. Maybe some hundreds of Gazans leave Gaza for humanitarian reasons, but we will not see huge waves of Palestinians from Gaza. But the size of the bombardment and Israel's doctrine of redrawing the borders of Gaza, maybe we will see some waves of refugees escaping to Sinai. So therefore, the Arab position should not suffice to just asking Palestinians not to leave. They should take real practical steps to protect the Palestinians. The only guarantee for that is to stop the war and destruction. This is not only in favor of Palestinians, but it's in favor of the Arab countries, and to stop this suffering, and also not to make the responsibility move from Israel to Arab countries.
Thank you, Dr. Ayat. I would like to thank the panelists and would like to open the floor for question and answers. Would like to have two microphones, one here and one over there. So we're going to start here, please. So the maximum duration of interventions is 2 minutes. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Thank you very much for the papers, for the interventions. I would like to thank you very much. These are very important interventions. But I feel that the papers were too objective, not too close to the reality on the ground. So what used to happen in the past and what are people facing till now? So Gaza, prior to the recent aggression, was in some level of prosperity. So we have had the withdrawal of the humanitarian agencies. We have a complete deficit. We're not talking about a normal line of poverty. People were well below the poverty line. We're talking about 60% of those who are below the poverty line are youth. This is the first point. The second point, we were at a time where we talked about the crossings to open some of those crossings, and the situation has changed altogether. What has this war done? What is it going to do? So in a much more realistic way, it is not going to take Gaza to square one. No, we're going to go beyond that. We're talking about a huge level of destruction. There's an example that we are talking about in an objective way, yes, but let me tell you about what is happening. So the idea of martyrs, it's not only a matter of numbers, number of martyrs. So most people, once the war ends, we will not be able to count the number of people who have died. We're just waiting for those who are still alive. What is their fate? So we're waiting to hear what is going to happen as if we are watching this genocide. This is not just a genocide. So this is a famine as well. So some of the messages that I receive, people who communicate with me, what do they tell me? Every day I receive messages either people are dying, have died, have no water to drink. There are a number of martyrs in Rafah, approximately 200 people. Many of those martyrs died thirsty. Can you imagine what is the share per capita per person? What you talked about is idealistic. We're talking about what is even lower than that. One person cannot have more than 400 milliliter of water. And I know that there is a video by Bisan, one of the YouTubers. She said that there is only 400 milliliter. One child took that 400 milliliter to drink because he couldn't find water. So we're talking about genocide. We're talking also about many other practices, ethnic cleansing, and so on. So. So when it comes to IHL, I can talk about in excess of 10 violations when it comes to IHL. But people there, we do expect that 2 million people are we going to have only one. Some of them are going to be dead, some of them are going to be injured. And if you give me one extra half a minute, hospitals are not only numbers. So we are watching what is happening. All the 8,000 that you talked about, these are all possible martyrs, martyrs that might die. So what I cannot understand also, one of the professors perhaps can explain this to us, or maybe anybody else here present with us can explain this to me. Why up to now, when we succeeded to some extent in 2021 to change the narrative that is presented by the occupying force, how we came back again to square one, to start again explaining the basics. Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Egypt yesterday said that the occupying force did not allow the entry of humanitarian aid. Why should you wait for the occupying force to allow you, not to allow you? I think that there is too much rhetoric, too many talks, too many words said, but nothing tangible on the ground. Thank you very much, Zahir Omarin from the Arab TV. Dr. Tamer, during your intervention, you talked about attempts to present the Saudi Arabian position as an advanced position, and this is something that we have heard a great deal. And you talked about the position of Egypt as being a firm position vis-à-vis expulsion, and this is not enough. Dr. Ayat said that we have to have real positions undertaken by the Arab countries. If we exclude countries such as Syria, which is occupied by the Assad regime, what can Saudi Arabia, Egypt do? And they have not done so vis-à-vis what is happening in Gaza. And what are the reasons why these positions are being talked about and that this is the ceiling of their possibilities when we talk about Saudi and Egypt? And this has reflected on the popular level as well. We always used to say that governments do not have advanced positions, but the people are prepared. But we do not see that reflect on the ground when it comes to the people who took to the street. Another intervention from here, please. I would like to take the floor, but I have a quick question. Why, when we talk about the Gazan situation and talk about it from a humanitarian perspective and not a political perspective, we talk about a humanitarian catastrophe, and that is why the world should move and do something about it? Or we have a de facto government in the in Gaza, which is Hamas, but we never talk about Gaza as part of the Palestinian territories, occupied territories, in addition to the West Bank, and that this is an advanced lab of what is going to happen in other territories. During this discussion, there were talks about Gaza as one planet in isolation of other parts of Palestine. So most of the discussion concentrated on the humanitarian perspective. We're talking about IHL and so on. And we do not reflect the political component. So we have had the flood attempt, the Tufan attempt. So what we're talking about is catastrophic. It's inhumane, but we should not forget the starting point to lead to what we have now. Thank you, Dr. Abdelhamid. Go ahead. Abdelhamid Siam, I have a question, and I would like your view on it, Dr. Tamer. How do you explain the fact that Israel is not ready to respond to the infiltration of the wall from different positions and the entry of in excess of 1,000 fighters, and also having their own vehicles, helicopters, and also armored vehicles for approximately 6 hours. What we know about the Zionist entity and its readiness and so on. Yes, perhaps they're late by 10 minutes, half an hour, but to be late in responding is unreasonable. We do not have an objective explanation of that unless this was done intentionally. And this is written. Maybe when Israel discovered this loophole, they let it go. They gave it time in order to justify the acts that have been committed afterwards. So thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists with us here today, and I would like to bring to your attention, and I would like to mention two things. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is that Gaza is the whole Palestinian cause, and that resistance is the whole resistance. We cannot summarize the Palestinian cause in Gaza. We have a general cause. The second point is IHL and weeping over IHL. We know that IHL does not exist today. The line got interrupted. So that is why the timing is very important. So when we ask questions about the timing, as if we are talking about only the operation that was carried out by the fighters in Gaza, and that the Palestinian mind was able to take the adequate time to carry out its operation. So this is a very, very successful kind of choice of timing, and we cannot continue asking questions about it. So when we talk about expulsion, so talking about Sinai as being the alternative territory, and that had been planned for some time now, and the international reactions that have appeared after this battle and after the fighters entering Palestine. So the international positions, the visit by the foreign minister of the US or the Secretary of State, and the fact that they do not have safe corridors for Palestinians to use, and so on. And the last thing that I would like to talk about is the response of Arab states is not up to what is happening. What we fear is not about the Palestinians, but those who are carrying out all this conspiracy. So we're going to give the floor to the panelists, and after that, we're going to have another round of questions. Thank you very much for the questions and interventions that are very important indeed. I have three questions or three answers in actual fact. Dr. Tamer, we talked about everything. We talked about all what we heard and saw in the last 10 days, all the scenarios. The situation has become much more intricate. And my question, what is your analysis of the current situation? What do you expect is going to happen? And when it comes to what is going to happen, I think Hamas is increasing its level of legitimacy, even international, the international positions and views. They cannot circumvent and do not talk to Hamas. Sweden, Norway see no interest and no importance in designating Hamas. The latest statement by Abu Mazen and the amendment of the statement makes us pose this question: how legitimate is the authority? So these are questions that should be posed when we talk about prospects of reconciliation. I have a question to Dr. Ghassan. So you talked about human rights law, IHL. We have seen the ICC that opened an investigation in 2020, and the rapporteur talked about ethnic cleansing. Every time we insist that Israel violates international law. So what is the use of insisting that Israel is violating the laws, especially that the violations get graver and graver, more grave every time? So what I would like to say, the situation, this is the first time that we have the first war after 34 acts of aggression, comprehensive wars and small wars. This is the normal status. So we're talking about water, about bread. So international positions are very important. But what is more important is the situation on the ground. Israel is asking the Gazans to move south, and also what is concerning now is that they fear that the wall would be destroyed, and what is going to happen after that. So we have questions from different social media platforms, so we can include them in the interventions. We have two questions. So what is the capacity of the Iron Dome if the conflict expands, if Hezbollah takes part in the war? And there is another question from another social media outlet. So what about the emergency plan, particularly when we talk about a land confrontation? Go ahead. There are more than one observation when it comes to relying on Gazans and their capabilities on the ground, and that they're going to be able to challenge and overcome the repression and the machinery of Israel and not accept to be expelled from their own territories. The more pressure you put, they're going to move forward and forward. This is the human nature. So these are not people of a different nature. These are humans. So is expulsion impossible? No, it is not impossible. This is a scenario that can happen. And as Dr. Tamer had said, people went out, shopped, and came back. But the Egyptians did not allow them to go beyond what was allowed. And the same applied to 2008. Yes, go to Arij and come back. This is what they were asked to do. So the situation was not as it is now. If they cross the borders, is Israel going to allow them to come back after the operation is done? No, I do not exclude the scenario of expulsion. And the second point that I would like to talk about, the Arab reactions. Yes, they let them down. So you have seen those who have let us down, and this is in keeping with the prophetic tradition. So there was one of the supporters of the Palestinian resistance who talked about how they were let down by the people and by the Arab countries. When we talk about Arab governments, perhaps we would cry over what used to be the case in the past. The situation is worse altogether. So we wish the situation is as it used to be. At least King Hussein used to come to Tel Aviv and talk to the people in Tel Aviv to alleviate the pressure that is exercised on the Palestinians. I cannot be optimistic here. The only source of optimism, as Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Tamer have said, is the fact that the Palestinian cause has come to the forefront once again, and that Israel is a country that can only be an enemy, and that Israel is not going to be a savior nor hope for any Arab country that is seeking protection. But when it comes to IHL, very quickly, I would like to say the only benefit that we can reap from the implementation of IHL is to document the atrocities that had been committed. Thank you very much.
Zahar from Arabic television. No, the Arab position is never advanced. It's always reactive. Of course, there is a lot that Arab countries can do. The Arab countries have economic and political relations with America and the West. The Saudis play the game of oil prices with America by way of leverage. They can do that if they so wish over Russia and Ukraine. Now there is some sort of a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and it seems that sharp messages were sent to the Saudis that there can be a huge war. The Americans have let down the Arabs before in the question of Yemen and others, so this will not be new. Maybe they're warning them of a huge conflict if they continue normalization. The war is basically a political crisis. This is the dead end that we reached politically led to the current crisis. So, I agree with my friend and brother Dr. Ghassan. If there is no compulsion, if there is compulsion, expulsion, the Economist now is saying that if there is a deal involving Saudi Arabia and the UAE, there can be a temporary expulsion of Gazans, and the Americans will guarantee that they will return once the conflict is conflict. We don't know about these things. Dr. Abdul Hamid, sorry. I'm losing my memory because of these events. Your question is important. If you want my frank, what happened from a military perspective is a repetition of what happened in the 1973 war, but let us be frank, we should not really underestimate the Israeli army. They have huge capabilities. They can be barbarous. Now they are calling up reservists in around 500,000. This is bigger than the Russian army in the Ukraine. So they can attack, they can do damage, but they should expect reactions. Majid also, it's an open question. It depends on the regional and international game. We cannot, at this point, it's fluid, we cannot control it. Thank you. Majid's question about the numbers. I think Gaza never lived in a state of peace. This is continuous war. If we want to start from 2006 until now, on top of 75 years of colonialism, apartheid by the Israelis on the entire Palestinian land. Now this war is interactive. We cannot get exact figures because the situation changes by the hour. The numbers I used was just an attempt to show us what the situation is like. The wars never now is 11 days or 12 days. This is a war which has been ongoing for 16 or 17 years, and we're saying the consequences and the impact is accumulating. As for the expulsion, this is a possibility, but also history taught us that in the 50s, in the days of Jamal Abdel Nasser, there was talk about expelling Palestinians. The people of Gaza really stood against that. Also, the Abraham Accords in 2017 talk about a state in Sinai and the UAE's intervention, as Dr. Tamer has said, but ultimately, the people of Gaza has its willpower. They do not want to go through another Nakba. Even if there was a temporary movement of refugees to Sinai, they will always want to come back. Thank you, Dr. Ayat. I want to apologize for the question because our time is over completely. It's 2 o'clock according to the time given. We have a 15-minute break and then we will resume. Thank you for. We look forward to see you in the following session after 15